Hello everyone, welcome back to Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca. This is episode number 126, and the NFL playoffs are here. We have so much wildcard action to break down for you guys. But before we get into today's content, please do us a massive favor. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from today's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. And if you want to get the audio from today's podcast, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into today's episode. After a disappointing 2024 season, Mike McCarthy is out as Dallas Cowboys head coach, as the two could not agree on a new deal, so they are mutually parting ways. The talks broke down when the Cowboys wanted a shorter deal in the range of 1 to 2 years, while Mike McCarthy's camp wanted a deal in the range of 3 to 4 years. This decision came late in the head coaching carousel, and in typical Cowboys fashion, they are late to things. They were late to extend CeeDee Lamb. They were late to extend Dak Prescott. And now, while the senile billionaire Jerry Jones was being indecisive about who he wanted to run his franchise, they potentially missed out on other ideal head coaching candidates like Mike Vrabel, who has already agreed to become the New England Patriots head coach. Additionally, major hot commodities like Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn can no longer be interviewed, as the Detroit Lions are beginning their hunt for their first ever Super Bowl title. And that window will not open until the Detroit Lions playoff campaign comes to an end. Now, reflecting on the Mike McCarthy era in Dallas, it was an extension of the Jason Garrett era. Jason Garrett was Mr. 8-8. In his first few campaigns with the Cowboys, he was a 500 kind of coach. And then he finally broke through in 2014 with his first NFC East title and even won a playoff game. But after his contract was also not renewed in 2019, the Cowboys went with a different direction with Mike McCarthy. Now, Mike McCarthy did have maybe more success in the regular season. He had 2 NFC East titles and even had 3 years in a row where he had a 12-5 record. But with the Cowboys, he had less success in the postseason. Jason Garrett won 2 playoff games to Mike McCarthy's 1. Now, I do feel some type of way towards Jerry Jones for holding Mike McCarthy hostage during that 1 week where he had interest from the Chicago Bears, and he denied any chance of contacting the Bears on potentially filling in their head coaching vacancy. And it doesn't just affect just Mike McCarthy, as he is now late to the 2025 head coaching carousel, where he has maybe interest with other various teams, but it's also his staff. There are numerous coordinators, coaches, whatever have you, that were also kind of holding their breath while Jerry Jones was making his decision on whether he was in or out with Mike McCarthy being the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. So who could fill in this head coaching vacancy for the Dallas Cowboys, America's team? Many could think that it would have been Bill Belichick. Well, he was a free agent last year, but Jerry Jones decided to hold on to Mike McCarthy despite a disappointing finish to their 2023 season, where they were the number 2 seed and became the first ever 2 seed to be bounced out of the wildcard round to the 7th-seeded Green Bay Packers. In that opportunity, he had a chance to get Bill Belichick, but he decided to bring back Mike McCarthy, and now Bill Belichick is coaching the UNC Tar Heels. Another coaching candidate for the Dallas Cowboys could be Deion Sanders. Now, Coach Prime has been consistent saying that he would not leave Colorado unless it was for an opportunity to coach his sons, Shiloh and Shadur. And Shadur is already going to be going to the NFL, as he's slated to be a first-round draft pick, could even go as high as number 1 to the Tennessee Titans. But I don't think that this is a scenario that Deion would leave Colorado, because despite maybe them having conversations and then talking about the job, it would be a massive headache to answer to a man like Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones is the most hands-on owner you will ever see in the NFL. He's the only owner to be GM, president, and owner of a single franchise. He has a radio show on Tuesdays with a local radio station in Dallas. He's probably one of the only owners that answer questions after games. So that's a sideshow. That's a lot of drama that I don't think Deion Sanders wants to be a part of. But also, Deion has his own aura, and do you think Jerry would like somebody to take away or suck the spotlight away from himself? I don't think so. I actually found it really funny when Troy Aikman flat out said that the Cowboys job isn't going to be coveted in this year's head coaching cycle. And for a former Cowboys quarterback and honestly a former superstar for the 90s dynasty, this is a pretty damning statement. If you think about when he was part of the Cowboys at their peak in the 90s, he was there when Jimmy Johnson was the head coach. And then as soon as Jerry got involved and forced Jimmy out, things changed. Barry Switzer was there as a head coach and he did win a Super Bowl in 96, but that was on the coattails of Jimmy Johnson's roster. And since Jerry has had his hands all over this franchise, well, you can see what the success has been since. There's been no NFC Championship game appearances. And since then, not a lot of playoff success. At the end of the day, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys end up hiring another yes man to be the next puppet for Jerry to play with. The problem is whoever comes into Dallas is going to be inheriting a mess. They have a quarterback coming back from a major lower body injury. They have a lot of cap problems where they're likely not to be major players in free agency to improve the roster. Plus, just like last season with a holdout in CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons could hold out as he's looking for a new deal and could command major dollars as a pass rusher in this market. And despite the Cowboys being eliminated from postseason contention in the middle of December, they continue to dominate headlines in NFL media. The Baltimore Ravens put a slumping Steelers team out of their misery. The Steelers are just not the same. In the first half, they looked like a team that was out of sorts. They were getting run over. They only mustered 2 first downs on offense, and their defense just did not seem ready to play. And they gave up 21 first half points en route to a 28-14 loss. Now, we do think that Russell Wilson and the offense did the best that they could. They had a little bit of a spark in that third quarter to make it somewhat of a game, but they never seemed to have that complementary football. And like I said, coming back from 21-0, especially in the first half, that's a huge deficit to overcome in such a short amount of time. Kirk Herbstreit was on the broadcast for Amazon Prime, and he was questioning the fight of the Pittsburgh Steelers. When you think about Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, they were toying with this Pittsburgh defense. They allowed nearly 300 yards rushing on the ground, and that's simply just not Steelers football. Defensively, they're getting old. I mean, you have Cam Hayward, who's a veteran at this point. TJ Watt is getting up there as well. He's been in the league for quite a few years, and he's suffered a couple injuries, 2 of the last 3 years. And then Minkah Fitzpatrick, too, is a veteran safety, and he's definitely maybe not at the best as what he used to be, but still has maybe a little bit of juice left in the tank coming from the safety position. And particularly in these 3 matchups against the Baltimore Ravens, if you think about how they look offensively, Russell Wilson, like I said, hasn't been looking the great since the last 5 weeks. We haven't seen good production from the Steelers offense. Many will attribute to the absence of George Pickens in that middle part where he missed 3 games due to a hamstring injury, and that's fair. But since Christmas and the Kansas City Chiefs game, George Pickens has been back, and for whatever reason, that has not provided the spark that many Steelers fans would have expected upon his return. When you're thinking about how their offense has looked, it looks anemic at times. There was little to no run game. I mean, only 29 yards of running offense through the entirety of the game, and that's exactly the opposite of what Mike Tomlin's philosophy is, his tough defense and a good running game. And dating back to their first matchup, despite them winning 18-16 in their first matchup in Pittsburgh, the offense didn't score a single point. All their points came from 6 Chris Boswell field goals. And in the second game, it was 34-17, and it's been a long time since the Steelers have scored more than 20 points in a football game. It's been quite some time. And at this point in time, this is just about as much juice that you can get from the squeeze. Looking back at how Mike Tomlin has got here, I mean, he's done a great job of having a consecutive year streak since joining the Pittsburgh Steelers 18 seasons ago, where he hasn't had a losing season. That is commendable. But like I've been saying on this platform consistently for the entirety of this season, when have an organization or a franchise like the Pittsburgh Steelers have settled for just above average? Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game since nearly a decade. In 6 games, offenses for the Pittsburgh Steelers have only scored 24.7 points. And on the defensive side, the side that Mike Tomlin hangs his hat on, they're giving up a staggering 38.3 points a game, with several of those games going past 40 points. That's just not Steelers football. And the fact that this has lingered on for so long, I mean, let's face it, the Steelers hung on to Ben Roethlisberger for too long, then they've been scrambling to find a quarterback since. But these problems aren't just simply due to the quarterback room. I mean, Tomlin hasn't developed a quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger. Him and Steelers management have tried Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky. They've tried Justin Fields and Russell Wilson this year, and they've been good in parts, but they've all had the same type of results. One and done in the playoffs. And I get it. It's hard to win in the NFL especially when your defense is getting absolutely shredded. But there are some talented pieces, like I've been saying, on this defensive side for the Steelers. And I think at this point, they're past their prime. We have to do probably a huge shakeup in the Steelers organization. I think it first starts off with what you do with Mike Tomlin. Do you bring him back? He has a no trade clause, but maybe if there's an attractive offer out there for some other head coaching vacancy, there could be an option for you could trade him and get some capital back, because I don't think his value is going to be any higher than it is at this point. And then if you look at the division as a whole, the Browns now have an opportunity with the 2nd overall pick in this upcoming draft that they can get out of this contract situation with their quarterback and get a cheap, young, talented rookie quarterback either in Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward, whoever the Titans don't pick at number 1. The Cincinnati Bengals, they're a team that has their franchise quarterback in Joe Burrow. They're not going away anytime soon, despite numerous problems on the defensive side and their contract problems between Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They will figure out a way. I'm pretty sure at the minimum, the core on the offense will stick together. And then with a new defensive staff, I'm sure also the defense will improve this upcoming offseason. The Ravens obviously have a multiple-time MVP winner in Lamar Jackson, and John Harbaugh has honestly outperformed Mike Tomlin during his tenure. They've overlapped for 17 seasons, and in that run, John Harbaugh has led the Ravens to multiple AFC Championship game appearances and now has compiled 13 playoff wins. And that's over a span where he had Joe Flacco, similar to Ben Roethlisberger, and then the Ravens retooled in 2018 and got Lamar Jackson. And it's been great since, and we'll see what happens with this playoff run right now for the Ravens, but it's 2 teams going in very opposite directions. And as great as Mike Tomlin has been, the NFL is all about what have you done for me lately. And lately, it's been one and done, 10-7, 9-8. And then you stumble into the playoffs and you get bounced out by a wide margin. And the Pittsburgh faithful, they're clamoring at the bit to get rid of Mike Tomlin, whether trade him or just straight up fire him. And it's no way or shape and form disrespect to Mike Tomlin. He's been great. But his stubbornness and also the Rooney's inability to see what writing is on the wall is going to be only their doom. And at this point, they have to really recognize that the only way to get out of this funk is to simply reset the whole team. After wildcard weekend, I wanted to discuss the narrative around some of these young hotshot quarterbacks like Justin Herbert and Jordan Love. Obviously, both are very talented players. They have a lot of physical gifts. They're big, they're strong, they're kind of mobile, have rocket arms, and, well, they're really fun to watch. Well, unfortunately, over the past weekend, these 2 quarterbacks in particular, who were kind of anointed as the next generation of young gun quarterbacks in the NFL, well, they laid stinkers in wildcard weekend. To start with Justin Herbert, well, he threw 4 interceptions against the Houston Texans, and I've understood that the Texans defense was pretty good if you think about the pass rush and then their defense as a whole with the secondary. But some of these interceptions were just really inexcusable. If you think about the throw across the body, targeting Quentin Johnston out of all receivers, I mean, that is just not good offense at all. I mean, Quentin Johnston has been a bust since entering the NFL, and despite a slight uptick this season, I would not like to make my chances against him against Kamari Lassiter. The other two interceptions were him making plays, or that's at least the excuse, but the interception performance, at least throwing 4 in a playoff game, now dropping to 0-2, isn't that great a look. And then if you also think about his contributions to the massive collapse just 2 seasons ago against the Jacksonville Jaguars, while he didn't have a terrible game, his lack of running an offense to at least kill the clock and at least stop the Jags' momentum in that wildcard game can be attributed to him. Make excuses what you want for Justin Herbert. He's a very young quarterback, so expect him to rebound in year 3. Expect him to rebound with another year under Jim Harbaugh. For Jordan Love, he had a 3 interception performance against the Philadelphia Eagles. And just like Justin Herbert, I thought that a lot of these interceptions were either balls that were misplaced or just not reading the defense. Because last year, after beating up on the Dallas Cowboys, and that was a really good performance. That's the first ever 7 seed to upset a 2 seed. And that's going to always be tied to Jordan Love. He had this Cinderella run. He took the top-seeded 49ers to the gun, basically. But in this performance against the Philadelphia Eagles, road test, and I understand 3 receivers that eventually get knocked out, you lose some offensive linemen, but the interceptions were a problem. The interception to Darius Slay was underthrown. It didn't make a lot of sense trying to make that kind of throw, at least in that position, because Darius Slay, despite being maybe a little bit of an older cornerback, he is still very fast. The issue with the throw to Zach Bond, well, Zach was dropping into coverage, and for whatever reason, Jordan Love did not see him. And I don't have too much blame for Jordan Love just trying to make a play, which it was a last gasp attempt, but the throw to Quinion Mitchell in the end zone, it was double coverage. It didn't really make a ton of sense for that receiver to win against him and CJ Gardner-Johnson. We may need to pump the brakes on these two guys. I mean, this is still very early in their careers, like I've been saying, but while anointing them as maybe these hot commodities, I mean, these two have a combined playoff record of just 1-4 in the playoffs, and that's not that great. And let's give them a little bit of patience, because obviously football is a team sport, so they need a little bit more of a supporting cast. But I think anointing these two quarterbacks as the next best is something where we need to have some cause to pause. The Philadelphia Eagles ride stingy defense en route to a 22-10 victory over the Green Bay Packers. For the first time since the NFL playoffs expanded to a 14-team playoff, the 2 seed faced an 11-win team. The defense forced 4 turnovers, including 3 Jordan Love interceptions, which I detailed earlier in this podcast. But starting from the opening kickoff, I mean, them laying the wood on the Green Bay Packers was really evident. I mean, you think about the physicality that Vic Fangio brings in, and not even just Vic Fangio. I mean, I think Nick Sirianni, as many people maybe underestimate his head coaching abilities, he coaches physicality. The Eagles on both sides of the ball are a very physical team, even on special teams, because on the opening kickoff, they force a fumble on the return, and they immediately cash in with a Jalen Hurts touchdown pass to Jahan Dotson. The Eagles offense could have scored more points, absolutely, but it's a 12-point victory. But I know many people are going to criticize Jalen Hurts and his performance, where he had 13 out of 21 passes for under 150 yards, but he passed for 2 touchdowns and was really efficient when he needed to be. Yes, the offense wasn't as crisp, but if you really look at how the play calling was during this game, there were a lot of opportunities where the Eagles offense left meat on the bone, and I think that comes back to Kellen Moore. But I don't think Jalen Hurts had a bad game. I think the worst thing he did was take a sack in the first half, but that was pretty much it. Offense was doing their thing when they needed to. I mean, if you look at that drive in the second half when the Eagles were up 10-3, they had a touchdown drive to Dallas Goedert where he stiff-armed the defensive back 3 different times en route to the end zone, and that just shows the amount of physicality that the Eagles have. And additionally, Saquon Barkley went for 119 yards rushing, where nothing gaudy. I mean, he had a couple of carries that went for more than 10 yards, but nothing great from Saquon's part. But he could have had a lot more on the final carry that he had in the game. He could have broken it for a touchdown, but so wisely slid down to let the clock expire, because he could have easily scored to make it 29-10. He cited that the Eagles could have had injuries to the offensive line blocking for that play, or he could have maybe pulled a hamstring running for a meaningless touchdown. So very wise, very selfless, and honestly love that for this team, where they're just very unselfish. But nonetheless, I think the Eagles were in control for much of this game. I mean, it was 10-0, and then when it got a little bit hairy in the fourth quarter, when it was 16-10, I was a little concerned, absolutely, but I trusted the Eagles offense to grind out and kill clock, and that's exactly what they did. Not a pretty victory, but with this Eagles offensive line, the formula is run the rock, ride Saquon Barkley, who is yet again phenomenal in his playoff debut for the Philadelphia Eagles, and trust this defense. I mean, Vic Fangio has done a phenomenal job. The Eagles' pass rush against the Green Bay Packers was also really successful. While maybe just getting 2 sacks from Nolan Smith isn't spectacular, but that does show the strides that Nolan Smith has made this season. After having only 1 sack in his rookie campaign, many think he was a bust. Well, Vic Fangio has found something in Nolan Smith as well, where he's been really good at getting after the quarterback. The secondary, like I said, despite not having a single cornerback have an interception, their starters got in on the action, with Darius Slay intercepting Jordan Love off a deep pass to Dontavian Wicks, and then Quinion Mitchell, the rookie, finally got his first interception of the season and his career. The interception with Zach Bond, I thought, was also just stellar linebacker play. I mean, he's been playing sideline to sideline this whole year, and I'm really happy that he got the recognition he deserved with the All-Pro status. I haven't seen a first-team All-Pro linebacker for Philadelphia in many years. As a whole, this defense is so ferocious. They force so many tough hits against the Green Bay Packers, who are a cold weather team, don't get me wrong. I mean, they do quite literally play on football's frozen tundra. But the way that they hit the Green Bay Packers, I mean, several Green Bay Packers were leaving the game due to injuries. It wasn't like the Eagles were playing dirty. They just hit them really hard, and that's playoff caliber football. And of course, talking about Romeo Doubs, I wish him a speedy recovery, because he suffered his second concussion of the year. And after the first one, he started wearing this Guardian cap, which I really do applaud him for taking that kind of respect for his body and also his family. But I really do hope that he has a speedy recovery. That seemed like a really nasty hit on the back of his head, and really hope that he does recover well from concussions, because they're no joke. But in terms of, yet again, addressing this physicality, the Eagles are really, really good on both sides of the ball. And in the playoffs, you don't have to have style points. A win is a win, and they move on to the next round. The Commanders and Bucs was a pretty fun game, where we got to see a nice rivalry between Mike Evans and Marshawn Lattimore, and this was dating back to Lattimore's days as a New Orleans Saint, where he and Mike Evans went head-to-head for numerous matchups, and they were very physical, they were tough, and a lot of times they ended up into fights where we saw personal fouls, and even a fight in 2022 causing kind of a melee or a brawl. In this game in particular, it was definitely advantage Mike Evans. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore was great for a little. Marshawn Lattimore has been great in years past, but at this point, I think he's kind of washed. Mike Evans may have won the battle, but the Commanders won the war, and that's mainly thanks to Jaden Daniels. It's been a great rookie year for Jaden Daniels, who will likely win the Rookie of the Year this year in 2024, and he got his first playoff victory, joining only a handful of quarterbacks that have won a playoff game in their rookie season. A big point of character for this Commanders team has been adversity, and when they were stopped on the goal line in the fourth quarter, when they had a chance to take the lead, they could have absolutely gotten down on themselves, and the Bucs could have maybe had a game-changing drive to kill some clock and also maybe get a score to extend their lead. Well, their defense was able to come up with a huge turnover when Baker Mayfield fumbled a snap, and veteran All-Pro linebacker Bobby Wagner recovered the fumble deep inside Buccaneers territory. This time, Jaden Daniels would make him pay, and he found Terry McLaurin for a touchdown on 4th and 2. And that was really the difference in this game. When the Commanders were aggressive in the red zone, they ended up getting touchdowns when they needed to. And that was really the insurance as well, because that meant that the Bucs could either tie or take the lead. And for the Bucs, they had an opportunity to maybe take the lead, but had to settle for a field goal attempt after botching a third and short situation, and they were forced to settle for a field goal to tie the game. In the clutch time, when it was late, Jaden Daniels made the plays. He scrambled when he needed to. He completed passes to the open receiver. On 3rd and 2, this was basically for the game, he ducked out of Kalijah Kancey's tackle and was able to get forward for the first down. I thought it was really masterful work from Jaden Daniels. What a clutch, composed rookie quarterback, something we just don't see in today's NFL. And for the Commanders now, I mean, them locking up this victory, I think is a major step in the right direction. This is their first playoff victory in over 20 seasons, and I think that's mainly thanks to this new ownership led by Josh Harris and Magic Johnson. For the Buccaneers, this is a major disappointment because they had opportunities to win this game, but throughout the entirety of this season, I think that Todd Bowles has really been an Achilles heel for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's a defensive-minded head coach, and he maybe trusts his defense a little bit too much, because in several games this year, I can cite the Chiefs game, the game against the San Francisco 49ers, and this game against the Commanders, when they had opportunities to be aggressive, maybe go for touchdowns, go for it on 4th down, go for 2 for the win. They elect to go for ties, and in all three of those games where they elected to go for ties, they lost them. Why not trust your quarterback in Baker Mayfield, who has been hot all season long? He's led the league. He's been great this season in terms of being efficient with the ball. It's not been the most turnover-prone quarterback, but for whatever reason, Todd Bowles decides to be conservative. And I think that's a major reason why the Bucs, especially post-Brady, have been just this okay team that it can really get, only way to get into the playoffs is winning a very bad division in the NFC South. The LA Rams sacked Sam Darnold 9 times in a surprising win against the Minnesota Vikings in a game that had to be moved over to Arizona due to the ravaging fires in Southern California. Unfortunately, the Rams could not host their playoff game in SoFi Stadium. The Cardinals did a great job in opening their arms to a division rival to host a playoff game. Now, they were able to transfer their field to Glendale, Arizona, and the game went as scheduled. But you could definitely see that the Rams were playing with a lot of emotions, that they were playing for the city, they were playing with a different type of fight, and unfortunately, they took it out on LA native Sam Darnold. Now, Sam Darnold unfortunately picked the worst time to have the worst stretch of his career, especially with the Minnesota Vikings. Remember, the previous time he played the Detroit Lions, he actually followed it up with a bad performance on Thursday night against these LA Rams. And surprisingly, the Vikings went 14-0 against the entire NFL, but in games against the Lions and Rams, they went 0-4. And the last 2 losses dropped them not only from losing the top seed in the NFC, but unfortunately getting knocked out of the playoffs entirely. This game wasn't close. It was 27-9, and it just never felt like the Vikings got into this game. From the jump, Matthew Stafford was dealing to his various receivers. Even Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua got in on the action for a fantastic night. But the defense, like I said, they headlined this game. I mean, if you think about the 9 sacks, getting into Sam Darnold's face, and they forced it to hold on to the ball. I mean, you have Vikings radio callers saying, "Get rid of it, Sam. You got to get rid of it. You're holding onto the ball for too long." To use his famous line against the New England Patriots, it looked like Sam Darnold was seeing ghosts. He was rattled. He looked like a deer in headlights and just saw pretty much every ghost or demon on that field. And unfortunately for this performance, it's going to cost him millions of dollars. Now, I don't think he's going to come back to the Minnesota Vikings unless he's really open to being a backup at this point, because the Vikings system, especially under Kevin O'Connell, I think is going to be something that could help Sam Darnold. If there's a complication or if JJ McCarthy goes down next season, he could get a chance to get back as a starter for the Minnesota Vikings or even the next team he plays for. But assuming he does leave the Minnesota Vikings, because I do think a team would pay him a decent amount of money, but it's definitely not the north of $40 million that he could command. I mean, if you look at the situation he was in, he was surrounded by a talented cast, but after the other stops that he's had, Carolina and New York in particular, the right fit is really important for quarterbacks and for Sam Darnold. So it's a tale of two stories, and wherever you want to cut it, it's going to be whether he gets the bag and then underperforms due to a shitty situation, wherever have you, where his new team may be, or he rides the bench and then has to watch J.J. McCarthy take over in Minnesota. But it's more likely that I think he'll take the money wherever it is and then adapt to that system wherever he may land. Let's preview divisional weekend, and we have to start off with a juicy matchup with the two MVP candidates in Josh Allen hosting Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Now remember, these two guys met up 4 years ago and it was a really exciting game, but kind of cut short when Lamar suffered a concussion and had to miss the rest of the fourth quarter. Now in this game in particular, I think that it's going to be really even. You have two teams that have really star caliber quarterbacks. They do a lot with the ground and through the air. They have two talented running backs. I mean, don't get me wrong, James Cook is having a phenomenal year. He's part of leading the league in terms of rushing touchdowns. He has had 16 on the year. Ties Derrick Henry, who's been second team All-Pro. The Bills as an offense aren't particularly fantastic in terms of their passing game, but with Josh Allen, when he's not running over defenders, he's buying time in the pocket and then finding guys wide open, because defenders can't stick to their guys for that long. It's a ragtag group of guys. I mean, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, for example, I think they're going to be very much featured in this game. Amari Cooper could channel it back just because it's playoff experience. That's really key in these types of facets of the game. But I do expect that this is going to be a shootout. One thing I'm still concerned with, just like in the wild card game, the Ravens look like they're going to be missing Zay Flowers due to a knee injury, and that's a big blow. Against the Steelers, who've been slumping for the better part of a month, I think that was some injury that they could survive. But against a team like the Bills, well, that's going to be tough sledding. The Bills' defense has been much improved, and they're getting healthy at the right time of the year. But the Ravens do have the ultimate trump card, and I think the X factor in this game is going to be Derrick Henry. A heavy dose of Derrick Henry, who can run over most defense in the NFL, I think is going to be key for the Ravens' success. Rashad Bateman, who maybe doesn't get enough shine, I think he's a really good number 2 receiver. He's been good in limited action, so hopefully if he gets some light and gets some pressure off of these other Ravens pass catchers, because I think the go-to option will be Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely as well. But we'll see what happens. I think, like I said, this is going to be a shootout, and out of these 4 divisional matchups, this is going to be fun. A lot of big-time storylines heading into the game, and likely it's going to set up a really good AFC Championship matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm going to predict that the Ravens take this in a very close matchup. It might come down to the last minute, and I'm actually going to trust that Justin Tucker, after slumping in the middle part of this season, he's kind of had a resurgence in December, that I'm going to bet that he has some type of play with a pivotal field goal late, and the Ravens end up going to Kansas City to play the Chiefs. The Chiefs starters, at least, haven't played since Christmas Day, and if you think about that, that's more than 3 weeks. Now, I think the rust factor is going to be maybe a factor for part of the first quarter, but let's be honest, this is the Kansas City Chiefs. Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, they're in it for the long run, and they're setting their sights on history. They're trying to become the first ever team to three-peat. And going 15-2 in the regular season, locking up the number 1 seed a week early, is a testament to what the program that Andy Reid has done, especially with Patrick Mahomes. This team isn't going to be anything gaudy. They know how to get it done. They've won a ton of close ball games, and I know the Texans have a pretty good defense. They showed it against Justin Herbert and the Chargers last week, but the Chiefs are a whole different animal. I mean, if you think about how a few years ago when this campaign really started, they came back from 24 down against a different version of the Houston Texans. But this new regime is obviously a little bit different. I mean, Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter are going to be getting after it in the backfield. But I think the offensive line will be able to hold serve, and Patrick Mahomes does Houdini acts in the pocket and even getting loose. He is sneaky elusive, and you'll see him probably take off for a couple of back-breaking third down conversions because there's only so much you can do against an offense like the Chiefs. DeAndre Hopkins, I think this is an interesting story because he used to be a longtime Houston Texan, but now he gets to go up against a team that traded him away and kind of set them into a rebuild in 2020. I love what the Texans have done. They definitely shocked me with the wild card victory against the Chargers last week. CJ Stroud had a solid game, but I do think that Joe Mixon, whether or not he suits up for this game, it looks like he may. It's just a little bit tricky to determine, but I do think he'll end up playing. He's going to be limited in some capacity, and I do think that's really the key to the offense for the Houston Texans. A heavy dose of run, and then you put CJ Stroud in situation for success featuring a heavy dose of Nico Collins, because remember that they're without Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs as well, and at full strength, I mean, this team could absolutely take on a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, but they're not. And the Chiefs are just smarter, stronger, wiser at this point, and it's just not quite the Texans. It's just not quite the Texans' time, unfortunately. So I'm going to pick the Chiefs, and they will be hosting the AFC Championship game for the 7th year in a row. Jaden Daniels has had a historic rookie year, and after 20-plus years of a playoff drought, the Commanders finally win a playoff game. Now, ironically, the quarterback that had their last playoff victory is actually going to be on the opposite side of the field. Not really on the field, but actually on the sidelines in Mark Brunell. He's the quarterback coach of the Detroit Lions. It's a fun fact. Detroit comes in rested, and they get back Knuckles as he's suffered a torn MCL, but after a short time away and getting a chance to rehab it, he is back and ready to go after a week of practice. And they also get back Terrion Arnold, who suffered a foot injury at the end of the Vikings game in the regular season finale. But let's see if the Commanders defense, who is solid in some capacities, but just like any other team, I do expect that the Detroit Lions can grind out a win against the Commanders. They're going to have a heavy dose of run. Jahmyr Gibbs seems to be ready to go after a successful regular season. And don't forget that Jared Goff is definitely dealing this year. I know he had a very bad game against the Houston Texans. He threw 5 interceptions. But if you take that out, phenomenal season, could have been in the MVP conversation. You have so many good pass catchers. Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, this offense playing at home, this is the first time that Detroit's had the 1 seed in franchise history, and I think this is going to be a big deal for Detroit fans. They're going to be loud, it's going to be a raucous crowd, and I think not only do they win this, they'll probably win it maybe by a couple of scores, and that's no disrespect to the Commanders. I think they've been great. With Terry McLaurin, I think that they can find some weak spots because the Detroit secondary definitely is susceptible to a couple big gains, but this is where the fairy tale magic ride does end for the Commanders and Jaden Daniels. But remember, this is a season to remember for Commanders fans, and I do expect them to be a contender in the NFC for years to come. The LA Rams had a great win against the Minnesota Vikings, and I thought that with these pass rush that they employed on Sam Darnold, I thought was really, really telling. They've come a long way since rebuilding this defense. Remember, this is the first year without Aaron Donald, and he's been missed at the early part of this year, but Jared Verse and Braden Fisk have done a good job in kind of replacing his production. It's not the same type of guy. Aaron Donald's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but Jared Verse in particular is looking like the defensive rookie of the year, and him having a scoop and score against the Minnesota Vikings was evident, but I think that the Eagles pose a different threat. Remember, in their first matchup, they won 37-20. Saquon had a 255-yard night, including 2 long touchdowns on the ground. The Eagles' offense also, in terms of their passing game, got really good matchups against the Rams cornerbacks. AJ Brown went over 100 yards receiving, and remember that Devontae Smith didn't suit up for this game. I fully expect the Eagles to mow down the LA Rams in this game because it looks like it's going to be a snowy afternoon in Philadelphia. That bodes well for the run game and the very, very good offensive line for the Philadelphia Eagles. They can pave lanes for Saquon to pick and choose his spots against the Rams defense that isn't that great against the run, and when needed, Jalen Hurts will make the plays to his talented receiving room, including Dallas Goedert. I think that with the Eagles, they just seem to have more than the LA Rams. And remember, coming across the country with everything that they're dealing with the SoCal fires and pivoting to this game in Arizona, it's a short week. They played on Monday night, traveling across the country and dealing with snowy conditions. The last time this happened was 4 years ago, and the Rams didn't do that great in Lambeau Field, so I kind of expect a similar result. Rams might keep it close to start, but with snowy conditions, that does favor the Eagles, especially their tough defense. I think that they can ground the passing attack that Stafford has. And even in their first matchup, the Eagles D-line got after Matthew Stafford. He was sacked 5 times, and while Jalen Carter may not have the gaudy stats, he's eating up a lot of blocks, and that helps out his teammates like Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, for example, but Nolan Smith in particular has been really hot too. So I think that this pass rush also will have a play in this game, and I expect the Eagles to also have a comfortable victory against the LA Rams. So that's it for this episode of Spectator Sports. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We are on the grind to 300 subscribers by the end of the NBA Finals, so if you can do us a massive favor, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. It really helps out with the YouTube algorithm. If you want to get more Spectator Sports content here on YouTube, we have it in our various playlists as well as on TikTok. And you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio perspective, we got that for you too. Link to the Spotify as well as the YouTube channel and TikTok are in the description. Shout out to Joy for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.